Oh, Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, they're linked.
I'm hungry. Wish I had a burger before the game.
I'm hungry. I wish I had a burger before I come.
You're coming to
That's
dinner?
why I came.
Yeah.
That's right. It's
why I
quite
ran
hard
it.
to get. Yeah, all the time.
Michael. Sorry, what was that?
I was saying that's why I left early so I could get something to eat before. So
Yeah.
I knew I'd get hungry.
Smart move. Very smart.
Oh, look at the crowd. It's a good turnout. So you're giving May a couple of hoodies of you?
Yeah. I gave her a hoodie each. I gave 2 bags. I put a hoodie in each bag. I put a Palestinian flag and 3 Palestine Melbourne badges.
Good one. Fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Riemer people of the Kulin Nation on the land in which we meet today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to talk about the shared connections of Indigenous struggle here in Australia and that in Palestine. We share a deep-rooted connection to land, settler colonialism and resistance. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters have experienced genocide, dispossession, murder, and incarceration of their families and their young ones. In fact, in Australian society, Indigenous people are overrepresented in the prison system, overrepresented in mental health services, are one of the most impoverished in our communities and oppressed. As Palestinians, we understand that struggle. Currently, we have 10,000 of our communities languishing in Israeli gulags, being tortured by the state. Our land's being stolen, our people massacred, ethnically cleansed in a genocide. This is a shared history of people living under settler colonial rule and its oppression. And we stand side by side with our Indigenous brothers and sisters here in Gadigal and all across Australia, because we recognise that they are still fighting back against that settler state, and that this land was never ceded, and it will always be Aboriginal land. Just as Palestine, from the river to the sea, will always be Palestinian land, Indigenous land to its people, regardless of our murder and persecution. And for those of you who are attending today, I believe you understand that struggle and you've become aware of Palestine, or maybe on your journey to learning about it. Today's event is being hosted by Free Palestine Melbourne and Demilitarise RMIT. It's an extremely important event because Palestinian civil society in 2005-06 and its trade labour movement called on boycott, divestments and sanctions of the Israeli state. We've always known that we live under a violent, oppressive regime, an apartheid regime, And we've learned from the histories of our brothers and sisters in South Africa who defeated apartheid. And for some of you who may not know, Israel had very strong links with the apartheid regime in South Africa and learned a lot of the lessons that are being applied in the West Bank right now through the theft of our land and the creations of Bantustans. It's extremely important to learn about Palestinian resistance and why we call for BDS, boycott, divestments and sanctions. Our Australian state and our very universities are complicit in these institutions of murder. Our government has weapons contracts with Israeli arms. Our universities do. Our educational institutions, workplaces. There are campaigns happening all around Australia, boycotting, divesting and sanctioning, fighting for those very liberation for Palestine. And we're very lucky today because we have two speakers who have a long history in BDS and who've had some successes. And there are lessons to learn from that. So on behalf of Free Palestine Melbourne and Demilitarise RMIT, let's give them a warm welcome before I actually introduce them. Our first speaker is Sarah Saleh. She is a writer, a human rights lawyer, an organiser and a daughter of Palestinian migrants from Egypt and Lebanon. Sarah has helped organise the boycott in 2022 of the Sydney Festival. And this was due to its accepted sponsorship of Israeli arts critics and artists. It was supported by 100 artists and companies, and it was one of the biggest BDS actions in the country to date. On a personal note, she is a fellow sister in arms, a gifted speaker and writer, and a mentor to many young Palestinian women within the community and outside our community. So thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Dr. Riemer. He is branch president of the NTEU at the University of Sydney and the author of Boycott Theory and the Struggle for Palestine, Universities, Intellectualism and Liberation. It's quite a mouthful, please look it up. However, it is on FPM's website, so you may be able to find it there. Nick leads the National Tertiary Education Union branch at the University of Sydney, where members voted in May for an academic boycott of Israel, a historic first for Australian universities and workers. Please give him a warm welcome. To facilitate the discussion after our presentation from our speakers is Dr. David Glanz. He is an anti-Zionist Jew who has been an active supporter of Palestinian liberation since 1976. He's also a member of FPM and the organising committee, an activist, and with the Refugee Action Collective, and a union member and a socialist. Please give David a warm welcome. My name is Mohammed. For some of you may have seen me at the protests. Free Palestine Melbourne has been organising Sunday protests for the last 10 months. We've been organising actions for Palestine for the last 4 or 5 years. We do more than just protests. We campaign for a mass movement for the liberation of Palestine here in Melbourne. We campaign in our workplaces, our universities, in the streets, in academic circles. We reach out to every heart and mind to teach them, to educate them, and empower them to fight for Palestine, because we recognise that Palestine is for every single human being here, every single person who believes in equality and basic humanity. So thank you, everyone. I will hand the floor to our wonderful speakers.
Thank you for that welcome, May. We will hear from both the speakers for about 10 minutes each. Then we'll go to question time, and we'll welcome contributions from the floor, especially if they are short and to the point, so we can hear from as many people as possible. Sarah, I believe, is going to start us off, and then we'll hear from Nick.
Thank you so much, David. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here tonight on this, well, I guess this is typical warm weather. Sorry, but not really for me. So the fact that you braved it isn't really that brave. You're just used to it. Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. In any case, choosing to be here. I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. Acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. As one person, as a daughter of people who have been dispossessed, coming here, being complicit in dispossession here is something that weighs heavily on my conscience each and every day. But that's not where it ends. That's what fuels me and drives me and is what motivates me to continue in the best way I can to respond to First Nations people's calls to do as much as we can in our capacity to stand by them and behind them in their struggle for sovereignty and self-determination as well. I would also like to thank Free Palestine Melbourne and Demilitarize RMIT for bringing us here. I know that events like this take a lot of work. I don't take that lightly. I don't take this privilege lightly, but what I do want to say is that it is deeply healing to be here at a time when our community is in collective grief and is under siege from every possible angle you can imagine. We're all exhausted, as I'm sure is no surprise, but being here fills my cup. If there were a silver lining to any of this, it's our irrepressible solidarity. I'm going to talk today about the Boycott Sydney Festival campaign that my sis May mentioned earlier. And if you can bear with me, because I'm going to assume that perhaps people aren't across it in a lot of detail. So I'm going to give a bit of a detailed overview just so that we can get as much possible out of this, so it's practical, and then later in the discussion perhaps lessons and so on, analysis can come out as well. So fresh out of lockdown in November 2021, Dr. Michael Mohammed Ahmed, who is the director of a Western Sydney-based literacy organization called Sweatshop. So Dr. Mohammed and artists, including Paula Aboud and Alisar Shadiak, Arab artists from Arab Theatre Studio, another Western Sydney-based collective, discovered that Australia's most iconic annual cultural event had embraced the Israeli embassy in Canberra as a star partner of its 2022 program, so 2021-2022 Sydney Summer Festival program. Up until that point, Sydney Festival had been working with Mohammed and with ATS Arab Theatre Studio artists on partnerships. They wanted to tap into the strength and the vibrancy of diverse Western Sydney communities and our exploding art scene. It wasn't until by complete accident that the Sydney Festival website went live that ATS and Mohammed found out about the Israeli embassy sponsorship, the colorful logo of the Israeli partnership brazenly displayed on the website as a star partner. So the artists called an emergency meeting between themselves, myself, other Arab artists, including myself, Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah, who would be known to many of you here, and other community artists that we are all, in relationship with. We came together, and as an intersectional, intergenerational collective of artists, all with histories of deep engagement in creative, activist, academic, and community practice, and decided on a plan of action We, along with other Palestinian organizers and community organizations that we would contact, including Palestine Justice Movement Sydney, which Nick was actually part of at the time, and there were other people involved as well. We decided that we would meet with the board of Sydney Festival and its director. We would have a good faith attempt to explain to them the harm of this decision of partnering with the Israeli embassy and shed light on the violent dehumanization of Palestinians, in case, you know, they weren't aware, and give them a chance to act, to do the quote-unquote right thing, right? I mean, that's the principle of organizing, learning, growth, the opportunity to build relationships. And if they refused, we would take a principled stance, and we were taking a principled stance. We would back ourselves and arrange a community-wide boycott. So we had the closed-door meeting, and in it, the director and a few board members informed us that the embassy's mere $20,000 sponsorship was going towards a show conceived by Israeli choreographer Ohad Narim and produced by the Sydney Dance Company. It was harmless. It was art. $20,000 was nothing. And Ohad, well, he was a proponent of peace. So we should just get with it. As though that was our problem, that he was a proponent of peace. Not Israel trying to public relations its way out of apartheid and genocide. We explained that the very source of these funds is in fact an apartheid regime that is systematically oppressing and dispossessing Palestinians. We elaborated that while the Israeli state purports to promote free artistic and cultural exchange, quote unquote, in the same breath it persecutes and punishes Palestinian performers and artists like Darin Tatur and Hafiz Omar for daring to speak out against the violence. And we're seeing it right now, the targeting and the wanton murder of poets and truth-tellers. We explained to the board that the state's occupation forces are systemically attacking Palestinian cultural institutions, disrupting events, destroying our archives, denying us access to our creative legacies. These are crimes against history, not just humanity. We explained that the regime they accepted funds from prevents Palestinians from practicing their own art, let alone traveling to perform, participate in artistic opportunities like this one. We gave them a chance to genuinely listen and learn, especially since they were so intent on partnering with our communities. We hoped that they would live up to their values, their stated values, which is what we held up to them. We asked them to embody ethical leadership, reject the sponsorship, and maintain Sydney Festival as an anti-racist, apartheid-free zone. Instead, you're going to love this, the festival revealed to us that they had actively pursued this partnership with Israel back in May 2021. What was happening in May 2021? Well, I'll tell you what was happening. Israel bombed Gaza. Nothing new, shot protesters in the West Bank, threatened Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, and arrested hundreds of Palestinians inside Israel. The biggest escalation of Israeli atrocities in recent times, probably since the Intifada. It was clear that the Sydney Festival Board were only paying lip service to the values that they stated, the land acknowledgements on their website, and the relationships that they were pursuing with marginalized communities. We were nothing but a diversity quota for them to fill. That was clear. So it wasn't a surprise when they came back to us weeks later saying that their hands were tied and they wouldn't reject the partnership. We were always honest with them about the consequences of crossing the picket line. But I guess they didn't believe us when we said our community was powerful. I guess they didn't believe us, and they didn't expect the love and dignity and respect that so many artists in our communities had for one another. So we spent weeks and weeks and weeks poring over color-coded spreadsheets, juggling a dozen different group chats. Not another group chat is my middle name. Sending countless DMs, making phone call after phone call after phone call with hundreds of artists and art workers, particularly First Nations and people of color. Many we know, others we don't. Asking them, informing them of what happened and asking them to join us and how best to support them in doing that, in joining the boycott. I want to make a very quick note here that we decided as a collective to be delicate in our approach, given the hardship that artists were facing post-COVID with little to no government support. We decided to ask artists to boycott, but for those who couldn't, we made a conscious decision to keep the door open for further conversation and support anyway. By the way, this was actually quite a point of contention, which perhaps we can talk about a little bit later. That decision, the dilemma of whether, if people can't boycott, whether we cut them off entirely or whether we keep that open. I'm sure it's relevant to many organizers in the room. Artists across the spectrum expressed their distress over Israel's Star Partnership and their disappointment that the festival actually didn't disclose that information until it was too late, until the program pretty much was almost out. So over the 6 to 8 weeks of the public campaign, so December and Jan 2021-2022, after our efforts, more than 100 artists, creatives, and crew withdrew. We disrupted almost 40% of the festival events and productions. Artists like First Nations rapper Barka, First Nations writer Amy McGuire, Nazim Hussain, Behruz Bachani all cancelled their participation alongside incredible popular productions like The 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner. This may mean not much to a lot of people in the room, but trust me, it's brilliant. And Michaela Cole's Chewing Gum Dreams, who, by the way, in their statement when they publicly supported our boycott, said, "To the Palestinian community, we see you, we hear you, we are with you." One more minute. 1,000 people signed our artist statement declaring their solidarity with us in the boycott. And this is going to be important, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Alongside the immeasurable awareness raising and impact, the international media coverage that we got, as well as the support we got from the global BDS movement, we saw prominent personality Benjamin Law resign from the festival board weeks into it, acknowledging the arguments that Palestinian and Arab and Jewish and other Australian artists and activists have raised. He was probably just tired because we harassed the shit out of him, but honestly, that was deserved. And finally, and I'll end on this, the campaign, Boycott Sydney Festival, triggered the festival to pursue an investigation months later because of the undeniable impact that we had and because of the artists that they are, at the end of the day, you would hope, responsible to and have a duty to. They decided to pursue an investigation months later, and as a result, they adopted a policy of not accepting any government funding, but we all know that's code for we won't accept funding from Israel, but we just don't want to say it. And that's how they framed it, but essentially we took that as a win and a success. And I think for me, that was probably one of the most important outcomes for the boycott campaign, but also for the wider movement in terms of divesting and boycotting from organizations like fossil fuel companies and so on as well. So I'll leave it there, but that's kind of the overview of what happened. And yeah, I mean, pretty sure we slayed. That's it.
That was fantastic, Sarah. I don't think there's any question. You scored an enormous victory for integrity, for Palestine, and for the movement for liberation. So it's so inspiring to hear that detail, because sometimes people think BDS is about, do I drink Coke, do I go to Macca's, do I go to Starbucks, what can I do as an individual consumer? The truth is, not that much. But when people organise, you see that the impact is absolutely fantastic. And on that note, we will now pass over to Nick, as President of the National Tertiary Education Union at the University of Sydney, because organisation is his middle name.
Okay, great. Is that better? Okay,
Okay, thanks very much, David. Thanks, May. Thanks to Free Palestine Melbourne and Demilitarise RMIT for the invitation to speak here tonight. It's a real privilege to be here. And let me begin by just expressing my respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of this land, which was stolen, sovereignty over which was never ceded, and which always was and always will be Aboriginal. It's obvious that we can't support liberation for the Indigenous people of Palestine without also supporting vocally, vigorously, with every fibre of our political being, the liberation and the end to the horrific ongoing war that Aboriginal people are the objects of and are existing in Australia in 2024. So look, I'm going to talk about the circumstances that led to the passing of a academic boycott resolution in the Sydney University branch of the National Tertiary Education Union. It vies with University of Melbourne as the largest or the second largest branch in the country. And this was actually the second time that we had passed a successful BDS motion in the branch, a little known fact. The first time we did so was in 2014, where we passed a motion that said that the branch would spend a couple of months discussing the academic boycott and then make a decision about whether to endorse it at the end of that deliberative protest. And that motion was passed overwhelmingly at a fairly small branch meeting and was immediately the object of very significant Zionist opposition. In fact, you know, the then National General Secretary of the NTEU saw fit to jump on a plane and come up to Sydney to fearmonger in our branch and to convene a special branch meeting on the basis that if this resolution was maintained, it would split the union, it would be the end of organised unionism at the University of Sydney and no doubt in Australian higher education generally. And that campaign was very effective. The branch narrowly voted to rescind that motion in 2014. The story this time obviously was very different, though we did have significant Zionist opposition as well. The difference was that in the interim, in that 10-year period, our university campus, which is sort of a microcosm, I think, of society more widely, had seen very significant efforts in pro-Palestine campaigning. We held a BDS conference at the university. Jordan was there, other people here may have been there, as Sarah was there, in 2017. We have a BDS pledge that many academics have signed, and since October the 9th, we initiated several petitions and open letters and undertook some very regular banner drops on a busy footbridge over a busy road just next to the university. That was a sort of very easy entry-level sort of advocacy activity that anybody could get into and participate in. You know, we had a ceasefire now banner, a hands-off Rafah banner, as well as all of the sort of standard institutional banners that we have for our various campaign groups. In November, we ran a widely publicised forum at the university on the urgency of a response to what was happening in Gaza. We also have, and have had for a long time now, a staff group at the university dedicated to advancing the cause of Palestinian solidarity. Yeah, actually, we do now, but we did for most of our history. And we've done a lot of agitation on campus. Parallel to all of that work, the NTEU's National Indigenous Forum, so the body of the union that is constituted by and has responsibility for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs in the union, actually passed a boycott resolution earlier this year, which was something that I didn't find out until we had ours in the work, and is yet more evidence, if any was needed, of the leading role that Indigenous solidarity has in this campaign, and will no doubt continue to have. We decided that it would be possible to get a fully fledged academic boycott motion in our branch. Tactically, we decided that we'd be better off if we embodied the substance of the BDS demands in the motion without using the BDS branding.
That's just because our perception had been that there had been such fear-mongering over the BDS brand last time that we would do better to just, cut to the chase and talk about exactly what the boycott action consisted in without overly linking it to the Palestinian National Committee. We made it clear that it's a Palestinian campaign, that we are doing nothing more than doing exactly what Palestinian trade unions, Palestinian civil society, Palestinian academics have been asking us to for almost 20 years. But nevertheless, in our framing, we avoided talking about the BDS movement, for example. I think that paid off. It's not necessary, though, because the ACT division of the NTEU, people may know, just passed an academic boycott resolution at the end of last week, passed with 80.5% of the vote, and that did make explicit reference to the BDS movement. So, make of that what you will. We had 4 motions, that we were specifically putting forward. I won't go into the details of them here. I can talk about them later if you want. One of them was the full academic boycott, the full institutional academic boycott motion that Palestinians have been asking for decades, basically. We stressed the recent International Court of Justice decision, the existing resolutions that the National Tertiary Education Union had taken since 2022, which were sort of boycott-friendly in some sense, or at least were Palestine Solidarity resolutions. And we really emphasised the fact that all we were doing was responding to the appeal from our colleagues in Palestinian universities and in the Palestinian Union movement. For that reason, we framed the boycott resolution not as a boycott Israel resolution, but as a Palestine Solidarity resolution, because the single most important thing about it is that it was giving the solidarity or enacting the particular campaign actions that Palestinians themselves were asking us to enact, and we felt that it was that fact, not the target of the boycott, that deserved the greatest, political weight. We did a lot of political work in the branch. We got an endorsement from the local representative of the General Union of Palestinian Workers, calling on our members and on all Australian Union members to take similar steps to the one that we were taking. We circulated a list of, I don't know how many there were, 20 sort of prominent members of our branch, saying why they were voting for the motion and encouraging all members to do that. That list included 2 or 3 former branch presidents, not all of whom had necessarily been as on the front foot as they should have been in the past over this issue. We did all of the normal sort of campaigning work that you have to do to build a mass sort of movement. We leafleted the university gates very continuously for at least the week before the vote, which is an opportunity to have conversations with people on the way in. We did a lot of social media work. We put in a one-on-one Zoom drop-in session so that members of the branch could come along and talk about their concerns, their questions. We issued a fact sheet. When our small group decided to do this, and our small group sort of is the dominant faction in our union branch at the moment, so we could sort of do what we wanted. Part of the political work we did was to say to people who were sitting on the fence at the branch committee level, so at the steering committee of the union level, we said, look, we understand that you are hesitant about this, but please, whatever you do, don't vote against this at branch committee level. And that didn't happen. They didn't vote against it. They complied. And that meant that we could go to members eventually and say, hey, this boycott resolution is recommended to you unopposed by the branch committee. And that was an important bit of political manoeuvring that we did to present it in the best possible light. We had a branch meeting, the best attended branch meeting we have had, I think, ever in a non-bargaining period. 350 people there. The energy for the motion was overwhelming. The Zionists could not even fill the speaking spots that were allocated to them. They exhausted after 2 speakers. They didn't even make overtly Zionist arguments. They made arguments that this wasn't union business or we should stick to our knitting, as one of them astonishingly put it. People joined the union and are still members of the union precisely in order to vote for that motion. And that motion passed with 93% approval. 93% approval. When we went into it, we said that we could not afford not to make a success. We could not afford to lose this vote. The political urgency was just so great that success was the only option we had. But we were surprised, I must say. We were surprised that the vote was so decisive. That 7% was not all opposition. Most of it was abstention. So, you know, we felt vindicated. Our challenge now is how to get our vicious Zionist management to actually listen to us. We hope that this will set the dominoes, you know, falling in the NTEU. We've already had a lot of national support, and I'd just like to, you know, end by just encouraging everybody here to have confidence in the prospects and the possibility and the meaningfulness of basic, dogged, persistent grassroots campaigning. It often feels as though it makes no difference and no one is listening to you. But sometimes you get moments like these, and we wouldn't have had that moment if it hadn't been on the back of years and years of people telling us that we were reckless, that no one cared, that we needed to campaign more sensibly. They were shown to be wrong, I think, in that vote. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Examples of collective action. Luckily, we don't have to vote them off one against the other. by both. And when people say on demonstrations, I say union, you say power, I think we've got a sense of what people mean by that. Collective organisation is phenomenally powerful. And thank you, Nick. If you are from Melbourne University and you're thinking, I wish my friends, colleagues, workmates were here to listen to Nick, he will be speaking at Melbourne Uni tomorrow to an NTU and I'm sure student activist audience. So tell your friends and workmates, come along. I don't know the exact details, but come and see Nick at the end of the meeting. I'm sure he can fill you in. We'll move to question time. While you're thinking of your questions, I'll just throw a quick one to our speakers just to get things moving, and then I will come back to you, the audience. I suppose one question is, why did you choose the particular tactics that you did? In the case of the Sydney Festival, you could have gone for a traditional protest outside an event. In the case of Sydney Uni, you could have gone down the path of disclose, divest, the way the student encampments have campaigned over the last few months. So why did you decide on the particular form of resistance that you did?
Thanks for that. I think that, to put it very simply, were you to approach this from a campaigning point of view, your first question would be, what's our theory of change, right? So in other words, what does success here look like? So, you know, you see a sponsorship, what does success look like to you? What is it? Yeah, you want the sponsorship to be cancelled, you want the partnership between Sydney Festival, an iconic, as I said, cultural and artistic event, to be cut off, to be rejected. They want them to reject it during sponsorship. So that's ultimate success. That's what we want. And work your way backwards. So how do we get to that, and what are the steps we need to put in place, working backwards to get to that outcome? In an ideal world, we meet with them, we tell them, and then they say, yes, absolutely, 100% done, easy, one tactic, straightforward, A to Z, and you're done. Obviously, we had a strong feeling that that would not be the case, and so, again, as any good campaigners would do, we had to look at other ways to pressure the festival into rejecting that partnership, and that meant going to the heart of it, the artists. Artists usually, in my experience, and kind of biased here as an artist, but we tend to be the most, or some of the most progressive people in the room. We tend to be, some of the most politically aware and organized. And so knowing that we had artists looking at the program who were on side, who would be horrified by that sponsorship, knowing your audience was important as a tactic, I think, or as, as part of it. Understanding that the festival had a responsibility to its artists and to the communities that it said it's working for, that it's serving, that it's tied to, and that relationship or those relationships, that responsibility is more important than sponsorship from the Israeli embassy. Those were all things that we considered in deciding. And of course history as one of our greatest lessons, looking at BDS and its impacts in places like South Africa. So for us, it was an obvious choice. Getting artists to withdraw, pressuring and having a picket line, pressuring the festival, ultimately in hopes that they would cancel the sponsorship, was our goal, our ultimate goal, and not allowing Israel to art wash its reputation. That's what we call art washing. So getting away with laundering its reputation through the city festival was our ultimate aim. That was the short term, and the last thing I'll say is there was also thinking around the intersectionality, as I said earlier, the longer term causes. So there are some serious issues in the art space around not only Israeli embassy sponsorship, but also ties, donors, and as well as other problematic, not ethical or unethical organizations using finance to push and bully and set the agenda. And what I mean by that is, for example, fossil fuels, obviously climate criminals, trying to launder their reputations through the arts and sponsoring art festivals and other events to sort of essentially get away with that. So there were wider implications that we also, and longer term, I guess logic or rationale that also drove us in terms of selecting that tactic, I guess, or that overall campaign.
I mean, for us, we felt it was also obvious and easy because particularly in the academic context, BDS is the only game in town. I mean, I think this sort of applies to the cultural context as well. I mean, there's one thing that Palestinians have been asking us to do for over 20 years, which is to apply a boycott, divestment and sanctions, suite of measures against Israel. So we have a strong sense that if we weren't doing that, we weren't doing what we should be doing and what Palestinians were asking us to do.
Okay, it's time to go over to you. I will take 3 questions at a time before coming back to our speakers. There is a roving mic. Tony there, who is both an MTU delegate here at RMIT and part of Demilitarise RMIT, will be running around with the mic. So please wait until she gets to you. I don't recognise everybody in the room, which is great because there's at least 130 people here. So I'm going to point to you or maybe describe an item of clothing. And I will nominate 1, 2, 3, so you know that you've been called. Other people, you can put your hand down and you'll have another chance. So please raise your hand. Okay, woman there is the first to raise, there in the middle, and over there on my right.
Thank you. This is for Sarah. With the BDS, with the boycott, with the Sydney Festival, are you able to speak a little bit to the secondary thing that happened in terms of how the artists then came together and created performances and shows outside of the Sydney Festival? So there was kind of like, I guess, 2 layers to this boycott. So it kind of, ended up being like almost like a parallel Sydney Festival, which was, I guess, another, an elevated way of BDS. Thank you.
The one, 2 rows front of me.
My question is particularly to Sarah. I am Dr. Nick Campbell, Melbourne University Faculty of Arts. I have posters on my door, pro-Palestinian posters. I've been asked to take them down. I respectfully declined. I have heard, however, and that's why I'm asking you particularly, that some colleagues of mine in the Victorian public sector have been told that the Public Service Code trumps the Victorian Human Rights Charter. So I thought you might have a comment there.
And the last speaker in this section is the guy over there in the black hoodie, I think.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to know if there was, for both of you, at any point during the BDS action, was there a point where you felt it wasn't going to happen? Like, what was the biggest obstacle that you faced that you went, this may actually stop us, and how you dealt with that?
I mean, October the 7th changed everything, obviously. Until then, in Sydney and in the university context, promoting BDS had been a very significant uphill battle, as was any kind of pro-Palestinian solidarity, in fact. And obviously, there are two significant obstacles. One is overt Zionist hostility and opposition. The other is just the default Zionism, which isn't even recognised as such, which is just baked into, the institutional parameters of liberal society. And you see it in the most glaring way in universities, which have been revealed as even more than we already knew they were. They've been revealed as these just obscene enablers of genocide and apartheid, run by people who never stop congratulating themselves on how progressive and enlightened they are, and never stop lecturing actual human rights activists on how they're, essentially the devil incarnate. So they're the obstacles. October 7 just changed that entirely. And one of the tragedies, I think, that we're seeing now is that this magnificent, inspiring, outbreak of pro-Palestinian activism that is sweeping the world, the price for that has been 180,000 dead, maimed, dead Palestinians. That's what it's taken for this modest uptick.
Very sobering reality. I'll start with your question. So, the biggest obstacle was the lobby dredging out Gene Simmons from the bowels of irrelevance to basically campaign against us and go out in media, mainstream media, and talk about how art is not political. That wasn't the biggest obstacle. It was entertaining, if nothing else. I was like, gee, who? I'm not that old. I joke because humor is how I cope, guys. I hope that is okay. It's been a difficult time. But real talk. Probably the biggest obstacle, I would say, or sort of the challenge that we had in orchestrating this campaign, and I want to talk, just very quickly say that it was organic. It was grassroots. It was non-hierarchical in the best sense possible. There was a lot of consensus-based decision-making. So all of that is well and good and sounds good in theory, but of course that also, has its own, poses its own unique challenges. But there was a question on whether the artists would agree to join the boycott, would agree, to not cross the picket line. There was no guarantee, we had no way of knowing, even as we were planning this boycott, I mean, the big question, what if they say no? What if COVID, which had shattered the arts, speaking as an artist, and as you know, poets don't get paid that much, shockingly, artists don't get paid all too well in our community. So they needed the not just the financial side of it, but they also needed the opportunity, the ability to perform after being. So there were a lot of really valid considerations, and even as you say, how much are your morals worth? That's easy to say, right? But also these are real considerations, especially for First Nations and POC artists. So there was a question of whether they would agree to boycott, as I said. And I think this was probably something that we could have never planned for, save two things. One, it was the moment. It was the time. That's not something that we could have controlled. So the material condition of the time that we were in at that point, and the work that we had been doing behind the scenes for a really long time, building relationships. So that just it didn't happen overnight. I didn't just go to an artist that I'd never connected with and said, can you do this? It was actually years and years of relationships for the sake of building relationships and solidarity and affirming each other's humanity in this dumpster fire of a colony. And having that, be the basis was what really, I think, propelled us and gave us the momentum we needed. So first and foremost, it was thanks to the artists. We should always be remembering that and acknowledging in particular First Nations artists. So that's obstacle one. The other one was inter-group conflict. We can park that for now, but that was another challenge. How the approach. Some people take a more, I want to say, Puritan approach to things, and some are a bit more pragmatic. That is a daily ethical dilemma you will face in organizing, no matter what. Also something that we needed to contend with. Having good conflict resolution is key. Probably triggering a lot of organizers in the room right now. But yeah, that's that. Posters. I'm sorry that happened. That's really pretty egregious. And I thought that they were really into freedom of speech and academic freedom, etc., etc. So that's really surprising. I'm not so this is not my jurisdiction. So I would need to have a look at the code of conduct and the charter. But it does sound quite shady, to say the least. And perhaps it would be good to talk to folks maybe who are practicing in this area, from the Rights Law Center, and other such groups who could possibly advise you better than I can. Thanks for putting me on the spot in a room full of 130 people. I promise I know, some things, but that's not one of them. Lastly, I feel like, and I cannot give legal advice. Let's just disclaim it that way in this context. Lastly, and this is my favorite question, so I wanted to end on that, and I hope that's okay. Thank you so much for asking. It's so important, and people forget the value in creating alternatives. That's what you're asking, right? So, in being in organizing and being in the spaces that we're in, we're really good at knowing what we are saying no to, what we don't want. What Nick said earlier. It wasn't about boycotting and targeting Israel, though that's part of it. The other part is we're actually standing in solidarity with Palestine. Beautiful reframe. So not just asking people to boycott the festival and then see you later, but also saying we are here for you. We want to show solidarity and support. How can we support you? Why don't we show them and model the alternative, the world that we are building, the future that we want? Why don't we actually use these relationships and have a sort of underground or alternative, non-apartheid, pro-racist and genocidal festival? Why don't we do that and come together as a collective and celebrate the artists? Because it gets really exhausting constantly fighting against and struggling and saying no. Sometimes you also want to say yes. So what's our vision? What's our future? What's our purpose? And that is why we ended up organizing those events as a sort of additional thing to kind of uplift and elevate the artists who were losing opportunities, and encouraging communities to go and just really all together celebrating them. I would say, and that's exactly why we did that. So whenever you are campaigning and you're dismantling something and destroying something, always also think about building something and putting something in its place and what that looks like, and giving people something to look forward to.
What's going on?
Thank you. I think we'll be able to take 2 rounds of 3 questions before I come to a final question to our speakers on the lessons of the struggle and for the future. So, who'd like to speak this time? Go out there in the black cap. Amin. And I'm shooting by using your name. Where's the other one? Oh, sorry. Over there. Yeah, well, please go ahead.
It's on. I live in a country town in Victoria. It is, excuse the expression, but it's art left white, and I say white in a attitude. There is a bit of a movement coming up to the council elections. There's everyone's talking about democracy, and there is a complete silence about Palestinian issues, First Nations issues. I've even gone to the council question times. They have no diversity policy, racial diversity policy. They have no cultural awareness training in the council. We've worked on a. I'm just thinking we've approached an idea, a concept, and I wanted to pass this by you all, that picking off the low-flying fruit, we can attack companies that are like with the BDS program, but there are a lot of shops that are supportive, and we're thinking of posters or stickers, apartheid-free zone, in them, and work our way towards, in a positive way. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on this from the panel.
Okay, thank you. Down the front here, Tommy.
That's what that reminds me of. Get out.
Thank you, everyone. That's fantastic. My question, maybe more to Asad, but Nick, I'd be interested to hear your point as well. Organizing back then, maybe 2 years ago, not a long time ago, but a big change in the movement, as you have so said, Nick, with a lot of mobilizing activation. So now that you look at the movement now, if you were going to organize a Sydney Festival boycott, what would be the difference in tactics and organizing that you would do, considering the current situation?
Okay, thanks. And our third question over there.
I didn't expect to have 2 Amins in the same round of questions. 2 questions, quick one for Nick. Given the university activism and mobilization that is happening and the attacks on the students now, both in most of the universities in Australia, including Sydney and Melbourne in particular, with the hearings, do you think that the staff and the unions have done enough to protect the students? So that's one. Sarah, not so much the boycotts of, obviously, or like they sort of do with Palestine, but more about what's happening politically in Australia around labour, and the fact that since the start of the war, there's been a lot of, obviously, whether it's like Ramadan iftars or events where we're not giving the platform for any of the politicians, especially Labour, to give them a message. Where does that sit with, like, you know, the whole idea of boycotting versus engaging with politicians in this country?
That's not on, guys.
Better now, yes, okay. So look, I think apartheid-free zones is a great idea. I think that sounds like one of the many things that you could do to get some Palestine activism happening in a context where it hasn't happened before. I think there are a lot of other things as well, though, and I think that the single most important thing is to do something and to create opportunities for more people to join you. The thing about activism, I think, is that it's this intensely democratic, or should be, I think, this intensely democratic activity where, in a sense, the goal of every activist is to do themselves out of a job because you want to attract more people into your organising circle so that you're continually, passing it on to other people. There are continually more things you can do. There are more and more people getting involved. And something that seems simple and that is going to be, consensual does sound a good idea. It sounds a good campaign tactic to me. I think it can also, though, help, nascent campaigns a lot to do something that's out there and controversial and that will get people talking. I mean, in Palestine activism generally, I seem to have spent most of the time in it, much of the time at least, being lectured by people about, just being too out there, being reckless, not understanding the politics, just not being nuanced enough, just not having thought about it enough. And, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit, or mostly bullshit. And so, I think when you're starting something up, there are almost nothing that you can do wrong, as long as you're keeping in line with, what Palestinians themselves are asking. That's how I would respond to that. Do you want to add anything to that? Okay, all right. So just quickly then, because I don't want to gazump Sarah. Have staff done enough to protect students? Staff haven't done enough in any dimension of Palestine activism or any other kind of activism at all, ever. I mean, the political ethos of white-collar professionalism, which academia and university work sort of expresses the quintessence of, I think is just almost completely inimical to political action. I mean, we think of universities as radical places, but it's a small handful of people who are politically engaged, and the whole centre of gravity of the academic world is completely hostile to the idea of sticking the neck out and taking any kind of risk, or of doing anything that might depart from the most rigid conformism, the most slavish, the most uncritical conformism, surrounded by intolerable amounts of self-congratulation and moral prestige. As I previously said. I don't want to sound unnuanced. This is a considered opinion that I have, reached on the basis of, dogged participant observation in this game for many decades now, and it just doesn't hit it, quite frankly. So no, obviously, academics, university workers, unions absolutely haven't done enough. Labour. Labour. I mean, there are debates in the Palestine Solidarity movement about what our relationship should be to Labour. There's no one answer to that. I know in Sydney there are endless debates about whether the demonstrations should platform dissident ALP politicians. I'm sure those debates exist in Melbourne. In fact, I think I know they do. It's a difficult question. My view, for me, it's helpful to compare Labour on this issue and Labour on the issue of refugees, which is where I really cut my political teeth. It seems obvious to me that on the issue of refugees, the ALP is completely unshiftable, will never do anything even vaguely progressive, and should systematically be, its representatives, its elected officials, its organisers should be systematically boycotted as far as the movement goes. frankly, who I think are deluded enough to be in the ALP and to support it. I think we should work with those rank and file Labor members. Now, is Palestine like that or not? I tend to think that the prospects are a little better with Palestine, and that there may, in some exceptional cases, be grounds for, a slightly closer level of, work with dissident ALP representatives. I might be wrong about that. I certainly won't be proposing that, but I'll just be opposing it less, forcefully than I would in other contexts. That's where I am on that. It's a complicated question. I hope that's not dumb or not totally unuseful answer.
I can only comment on Friday, 5 p.m. when I'm no longer a public servant. Okay, firstly, to respond to your question about labor. In case people missed the news that 2GB announced last week, I'm resigning from the commission. But in the meantime, my overall take is the two-party political system's running, and we have bigger problems. So yes, there is a question on engaging in the way that you are asking in a very short-term strategic way, but these are stopgap measures. They're only to prevent further harm as opposed to actually propel us in any way forward towards the vision that we have. And personally, I don't think that we are going to find liberation in a broken two-party political system, in courts, the way that they are now, particularly in a colony like this. Again, we won't even go anywhere near that Palestine refugees until we contend with and reckon with our history. So that's sort of a blanket, maybe, response that, we can unpack, but that's my driving, overarching Northern Star. That first and foremost, decolonization here before you can even ask those questions, because they are symptoms. Those failures are by design. They're not an accident. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and setting ourselves up for failure, expecting anything other than that. Junior, to answer your question about right now, whether we would do anything differently with the Boycott Sydney Festival, honestly, if they had any sense at all, they probably never would have accepted the sponsorship in this context right now. They would have imploded on the spot. But if they had, the level of self-organizing that I am seeing, the shift in the scale of solidarity has been incredible. And the artists, including Creatives for Palestine, have been on the forefront. We've seen it with the artists wearing the kufiyas on stage at Sydney Theatre. We've seen it with the artists who are fighting State Library Victoria, simply for being for Palestine. We've seen it with artists who have been refusing to work with organizations who have been not even actively participating and partnering with Israel and its machinery, but actually even organizations that are silent, that are neutral, that are hiding behind respectability, politics, and civility, and so on. So I would venture to say that our work probably would have been even, dare I say, less, because artists would have been self-organizing and would have gotten us to that result maybe even faster. Perhaps that's a bit of an overshoot or optimistic, but I actually think that's not optimistic. That is literally the result of organizing. That is the shift that we're seeing, and that's a real-time sort of, comparative analysis of how far we've come. And again, thanks to the work of many before that we are building on when you have the long view. Which is a really nice segue to your question, because I think that it's important to be guided by the long view. And so beyond just the elections, what is your vision for this? And if the elections is one long-term goal, you said council elections, right, local elections, and if that's one long-term goal, moving towards that is going to take 10 or 20 mini goals, right? And that your apartheid-free zone idea is a great message, an awareness-raising campaign. I love that it is way to sort of engage local members of the community. And I also really think that it's important to tie it to bigger things, because Palestine isn't an exception. You know, we're not asking for people to stand behind and show solidarity for Palestine because we're special or unique, or we're the only indigenous peoples that are facing ongoing genocide and ongoing injustice. There are many, and those are lessons for us, and it's liberating to know that empires have fallen and they will fall again. So what does it look like? It means that we understand that being an ethical citizen, being an ethical consumer as much as one can under capitalism, is part of being, you know, a part of this town, is being an everyday member, is being in relationship. So linking it and understanding the intersections, and understanding that being on side with Palestine means opposing, and being on side with opposing what's happening on stolen land, and being on side with First Nations people here, being pro-refugee, all of those things, I think, it's not overwhelming. It actually makes it easier, because it's like, no matter which way you spin it, you have an opportunity to grow and to move forward and to do something that's a small win. So I really love the idea, and I hope that it spurs on more ideas, and I hope that you get more people on board, but it sounds like you're definitely on the right track.
Thank you. Before I move to our last round of questioners, I just do want to say something in defence of NTU members, particularly at Melbourne Uni. It was enormously inspiring to see members of the NTU forming a human line, a picket outside of Mahmoud's Hall to defend the student sit-in, and then to see hundreds of staff members joining the rally in solidarity with the students who are facing disciplinary action. So yes, we all know academics who are stuck in their little rabbit holes, but credit where credit is due.
And nothing that I wanted to say is in any way to account for that. But the problem is that the vast majority of university staff are not into unions.
Absolutely. Okay, last three questions. Woman over there. Sorry, we just had a... There we go. Okay. The woman there, woman here, and then the woman there.
Thank you for teeing me up, actually. I am a NTU member at the University of Melbourne, at the Melbourne Law School, and was proudly there at Bible Hall several nights. Last week, ready to go in with our students facing misconduct hearings who have still not heard the results, but they're still quote-unquote deliberating. My question is in relation to, you know, the failures by design point, mostly to Nick, which is about the problems we have with the public university and the corporatization of the public university. And I say this also as a foreigner, as an immigrant who came to this land 2 years ago from a third world country where the public university is the public, belongs to the public. We have a say, it is our space. It is unthinkable for any public institution or public agency to have hidden corporate agreements that they say are confidential. And in India, this would have seen 100 freedom of information requests by now. Why is disclosure such a controversy? What has happened in Australia to make the public university corporatized to such a level that you don't see it as our space? And what can we do to fight this back? Because disclose, divest, we will not stop, we will not rest is a great chant, but I don't even realize why disclose is a question in the first place for a public university. Thank you.
Hi all, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm feeling very grateful to be here. I just arrived, literally has arrived, very jet lagged at the moment from Austria. I attended a positive psychology and well-being science conference. I finished my master's in Melbourne University 3 years ago in positive psychology. I really love the field. I'm a lawyer originally, and also love being a lawyer. But the positive psychology really grabbed my attention because of the possibility of exploring well-being for all of us. Quite early on, I realized well-being is more for the privileged, really. There is not much talk about communities that they need it most. Last year in Canada, there was big talks about how much we need First Nations from around the world voices. There was one keynote, Antonella de la Fab, that talks highly about that, Italian woman. So I went this year to Innsbruck with a lot of hope and expectation, and I just was angry the 4 or 5 days I was there. There were no many voices there, but there were many Israeli voices, unfortunately. So I felt very alone, didn't know really who to talk with. Eventually I ended up talking because I thought this is so wrong in so many levels. Nobody's saying anything about Palestine at all. So, okay, I was in a couple of workshops, one about social justice that we were able to talk about, one about anti-racism, we also were able to talk, and peace, but the majority, it was impossible. So I felt very angry, still I am very angry with myself that looking at the program, I didn't do any properly activism before going there. It's not late, we just arrived, I think it's still quite hot what's happening there. So my question is, what do you recommend a group of women? We are several women now, and we are collecting more. At the moment we are 6 or 7, that we were angry, uncomfortable in many levels, feeling that this is not working. I ended up wearing my Palestinian t-shirt the last day, quite afraid of it, but okay, I did it. And so what is your recommendation? What we can do in order to put this finally on the table is so unfair for not only for the Palestinian but also for us as human beings. This is touching us so hard. Thank you.
I just had a question, maybe not really about BDS, but are you having many conversations about like internet censorship at the moment, like within or between like organisers? I'm just curious about that, and like sort of how it's kind of like increasing, like not just like people getting cancelled and stuff, but like actual like Google search results like disappearing, like particular say like significant tweets that I think get mass reported and then like removed. So in some, I've read like some say important articles and they'll be linking it to things and those things have gone into like. Anyway, I'm just wondering if like you guys are having those conversations, but also maybe because I know like some people don't think online stuff is like significant versus like underground. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that as well.
Thanks for the great questions. Corporatisation of universities, and why is disclosure such a problem in a supposedly public university? I mean, you're, I think, the lawyer. I'm not, so I have no conception at all of what the technical sort of mechanisms are that might interfere with these things. It's obvious though, isn't it, that confidentiality is the new fetish of university managements, which they use to dodge the most elementary forms of accountability on any aspect of the way they run these places. So it's not surprising that it enters into this area under the guise of commercial and confidence agreements, non-disclosure agreements, etc., etc. I mean, it's obvious why private companies would not want their collaborations with universities to be in the public domain, because it would give their competitors access to possibly commercially important information and data. But it's really, I suppose, you know, what your question highlights, I think, is just how this problem that we're trying to face, how to, you know, discharge our responsibility to stand up for Palestine in the neoliberal university, how intimately it's bound up with this complex of other issues that we're also trying to contend with. You know, the confiscation of educational opportunity by the market, basically, you know, the erosion of academic autonomy, the destruction of the material conditions of students' learning in the form of, you know, the long ago effective abolition of all study, the students' basic enslavement to, you know, the labour market, even when they're studying. So all of these things are just wrapped up with each other in this very tightly knotted, you know, web, as you of course know. And what I think it highlights is the fact that, you know, you can't just chip away at one piece of this. So that when we fight for Palestine, and we have been very explicit about this, we are also fighting against the corporate interests that are strangulating, you know, universities and, you know, preventing the democratization of knowledge. We're also fighting against the market, you know, and it makes no sense to separate those struggles from each other. And we have to resist those actors who try to pretend that support for Palestine is not political and doesn't have any number of entailments about how we should conduct ourselves and what positions we should adopt. You know, Palestine is a struggle of the left. It is a struggle of the left. It's a struggle of socialists, or it should be. So I think it's a struggle for socialism. It's a struggle against imperialism. It's a struggle which really, you know, attacks the foundations of this horrific order that we find ourselves intricated in. We just shouldn't pretend otherwise. I think so. That's, you asked for an answer, I gave you a sermon. I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. Just on your question about the Innsbruck conference, I'm sure that was very hard to sit through. You know, solidarity to you. How to organise as, I mean, you did ask how to organise as a group of women. Sarah has asked me to respond first. You know, like, so what would I do? What would I do? I would agitate publicly. I would call, I mean, there's a question about what access you have, I suppose, to conference participants. You might have to take on a sort of quite significant sort of research and discovery role to retrieve the list of participants, find their email addresses, find ways of contacting them. I would contact them on behalf of a collective with you know, a message that outlined your concern, not just signed by you, but signed by a group of you. And call a public meeting, call a Zoom meeting at some time, or a series of Zoom meetings to air these concerns. The conference organisers will freak out. They will freak out. And who knows what will come of that initial contact. But that always has to be the first step, I think. Because, as I'm sure is obvious to everyone here, you can't do anything as an individual, and nor would you want to. So the first step in any campaign has to be, I think, to assemble a little collective of like-minded people to engage in groupthink, right? Groupthink in the best sense of that term, to socialise the problem and to socialise the solution to it. And from little things, you know, bigger things grow. And it's by getting people together in a room that you get all of these unpredictable, spontaneous synergies. And, you know, there's no reason that it should be held back. So that's a very obvious answer, I'm sorry. But I think it's really true, and it's easy to forget. Just call a meeting, and then try and get the message out to as many people as possible. Analogy 101, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask Sarah. Sorry, I'm not ignoring it.
Agree with everything that Nick just said. The other thing be good to have more information around. So you obviously haven't told us who the organizers are, what institution or who they might represent. I'm interested in the values that they hold, right? So a lot of these spaces have codes of conduct and value statements in one way, shape, or another, whether it's really obvious and explicit, so whether it's at the conference itself or whether it's the organizing the home institution. So I would be really interested in the values that they publicly espouse, and I would also use that and ask them and relate the issue to that and ask them to adhere to their own principles. Because then you've sort of cornered them, asked for their views directly, and given them a chance to respond, which then you can easily use further down the line if you need to. But I would always, it's sort of similar to what Nick said. It's an information gathering exercise is your first, suppose, point or first starting point. I know that there was a similar, and there has been similar agitation and frustration with some of the mental health organizations in Australia. So trauma, so I'm having trouble remembering, but I think it was Are You Okay Day? Is that what it, yeah, so Are You Okay Day, September, the people, the organizations behind it, turns out the first overseas partnership they have instituted is with Israel, a sort of an equivalent organization. So please look this up because I don't want to misinform anyone or misquote. But what has happened is the social workers and the psychologists and people who found out have been agitating behind the scenes, gathering information, growing their little collective, informing others, letting them know why this is problematic, so inviting people to join. In the meantime, coordinating and communicating with the people, the organization behind Are You Okay, I think, and asking for an explanation and asking them to, again, respond on the basis of their own stated values and holding them to account that way. I'm not saying that that's the only or, the only or the most strategic, but it's, in the grand scheme of things, a good idea to have their response in writing, which is what they did, because then if you choose to go public, you have emails like what the campaigners, the Psych Network did, and essentially use that again to create more and to attract more people and to create more change and to put pressure on them. So those are sort of like very top line things that you can do, but very much kind of the basic starting points and the steps you have in common across these campaigns, if that makes sense. I'm happy to send more information on that or to talk about it offline as well, or outside of this offline. We're actually here in person. In person outside. But yeah, I feel like those are really good starting points, and I am really sorry that you had to go through that. I think a lot of us are contending with these realities in very different spaces, and it is very violent. And so solidarity to you. I hope you find your people, and I hope that you're able to put energies into exposing that and just building better, as we said earlier. So yes, really big question. And I think internet censorship on Palestine at this point in time is really related to what Nick was saying earlier in response around, the fact that we are fighting imperialist forces, we are fighting market forces that infiltrate across, our daily existence, our lives. And we're living in an era where there is systemic oppression of Palestinian and pro-Palestine content, but that's not the only thing the algos are working towards, right? And that's, again, in a wider context. We have an era of serious misinformation and disinformation, and that's also really problematic, obviously. And one of the main things, like everything, is power. And where power is concentrated and who's making the decisions and how you undo that and how you hold, those behind the decisions to account. And it's a really big, difficult question. And I feel like on the note of Meta, for example, we found ways. They keep shifting the goalposts. They ban you know, the word Palestine, we find another word. They ban triangle, we find another shape. It's not watermelon, that's the problem. It's the fact that we are advocating for Palestine, right? And we're very creative, and we find ways around that. We collaborate, we amplify each other, we, you know, game the algo, and we keep gaming the algorithm. But I also think that that's a short-term sort of band-aid solution. We really need to look at the root cause. It's Palestine is a big part of that, but it's bigger than that as well. We know that people, particularly people of color, Black women, Black First Nations, and women of color are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by the trolls online and harmed. And it's something that I don't think we fully resolved. You know, places like X or Twitter have taken steps. Meta has supposedly taken steps. It's not good enough. So we need to be able to be really creative in how we fight that, and it is a part of, you know, the bigger fight. But one tool, and I'll end on this, or one way, is if you have instruments, for example, a Human Rights Charter or a Human Rights Act, and I'm not saying that they're perfect by any means, but they are a tool in a big toolbox that you have. If you use that and essentially use it against them and hold them to the standards that we currently have, that's one way to do it. So when people talk about freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, etc., these are the things that we need to be looking at when we are fighting these big changes. And I'm not saying that that's, again, the solution, because the power asymmetry is big. We don't have the resources always, but there are small wins that we can amass to shift the dial. Look, there's a lot of work being done by Palestinians and Palestinian organizations, particularly on censorship, who would be far more expert at. Definitely recommend that you also look them up and sort of look at the strategies that they're and the responses that they have and that they're recommending, because it's very serious.
Thank you for all your perceptive and thoughtful questions, but we are running out of time and we do need to move towards a close. So I'm going to ask the final question to both speakers, which is essentially, you've some direction, but what are the lessons that you would like us as activists for Palestine to take away from this meeting?
Oh my God, David, I had no idea you were going to ask that question. I did. I've been begging him all night to ask me that question, because I have some lessons that I would like to share. I was thinking about dividing this into sort of very logistical, technical kind of campaigning lessons, but that's probably dry and boring, so maybe I'll just sort of talk about the overarching principles of campaigning that we were guided by, and I think they're probably universal and always important to keep in mind. And if you want to talk boring logistics afterwards, we can, offline. Lessons. Firstly, we know with the Sydney boycott, the Boycott Sydney Festival campaign, we know that that campaign and siding with us came at a material and an emotional cost, as I said earlier, to the artists, to a lot of the artists, and to the organizers. And I think it's fair to say that that is almost always the case. I think systemically and historically marginalized communities shoulder the most, burden when it comes to this stuff, and I think that we need to acknowledge that. I think we need to be mindful of it, and I think that being present, being supportive, understanding that is really important. And our partners in Chaos, the Israeli ambassador called us at the time, fellow agents of Chaos, who were there. There were people who were able to do more heavy lifting than others, who had the privilege relative to others, and I think that that was something that really helped carry us and sustain us throughout the campaign at its most difficult times. We know that there are those who will be more focused on civilized modes of resisting apartheid rather than, dismantling the apartheid itself. We're seeing that right now. So they are problematizing our behavior. We are the problem, right? Our graffiti, our speech, our protest, our slogans, rather than the actual thing that it is we are opposing, which is the genocide. It's typical. Back then we were called agents of chaos and we were problematized. A nice little protest over here. You're not allowed this, but you're not allowed this. It's a neoliberal management of us. And ultimately, we need to understand and maintain that the real responsibility falls on institutions, parties, or folks like the City Festival, its board. They're the ones who should be held accountable for prioritizing that partnership over their principles and for forcing artists to choose between their moral convictions and an opportunity to share their art, right? To do what it is that they do. And so ultimately it is the Israeli state, rather, that should be forced to make a choice to dismantle their colonial project or face repercussions from international community, including our campaign here. We know that individuals alone cannot overcome oppressive structures, as we've heard many times earlier tonight. That can only be achieved through our shared struggles grounded in local and transnational relationships that are rooted in care, trust, and visions for mutual liberation. Again, I want to say that we are indebted to First Nations artists and leaders. NTU, you gave the example of them being, boycotting before you'd even realized. And in the same vein, we know that it was their wisdom in this campaign and beyond, their strength, their inspiration, their movements, Black Lives Matter and abolitionism, their building of communities of resistance, including through the arts, that really inspired us and is where we drew our strength from. Second last lesson, I think, is to not despair. I know it's easy at this point in time, and I'm really glad that despite a lot of the grief and the cynicism, we're able to end this on a note of committing and ensuring that we show up and we're committed with discipline to the movement every single day, even when we have no guarantee and no way of knowing that it's going to work, because no one ever knows, but you still show up anyway. And a century of Palestinian resistance and other indigenous resistance has taught us that our people are steadfast, and that in spite of the violence against us, we are moving closer and closer to our goal. We are actually doing that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to say to Amin what I said earlier, in that we wouldn't have even needed a campaign at this point. So we are moving closer to our goal. Don't underestimate that. And it's true that the Boycott City Festival campaign didn't, bring down the apartheid wall, as I say, but it brought people together, and it moved us into action, and it built relationships that are a lifetime, and that's worth something. That is worth a lot. And lastly, as an artist, people of conscience cannot accept that our art spaces be co-opted, diluted, or used by colonial machinery here and there to distract and detract from and suppress our communities in our struggle for self-determination. So solidarity requires praxis. And there's plenty more work to be done in that sphere. I mentioned earlier cutting off Zionist donor influence and the stranglehold over some of the spaces in the arts, the doxing and the flipping of that narrative, and this, the threatening of artists, especially those who don't have a profile, or who may be early in their career rather, and the overall silencing, arts organizations shielding themselves behind respectability and civility. Ultimately, history is our teacher, and we should always start with the analysis of the material conditions and campaigns, past and present, successful and otherwise. We know that artists have led resistance against oppression, and that has a long and important history, from abolishing slavery in the US to ending apartheid in South Africa, to inshallah dismantling the apartheid, racist, colonial, Zionist regime that is Israel, because sure as I know my own name, Palestine will be free, inshallah.
I don't
have anything. I don't have anything nearly as powerful or well thought through or brilliantly formulated as that to say, but maybe I can try and extract some of the conclusions that we've drawn as a result of our experience in that little, micro context of the union at Sydney University. I mean, the victory was, a realisation of bog standard campaigning tactics. And the real question, I think, is what lesson should we draw from the fact that mostly they don't work nearly as well as that, But nevertheless, I think we can, highlight the fact, perhaps the most important thing is the importance of persistence. So we have been very explicitly at the University of Sydney trying to promote the academic boycott for 10 years or more. And that campaign has had ups and downs, it's varied in intensity, but it's that background of institutional work, that slow background of institutional work, which has often seemed hopeless, which is what paid off at that 93% vote. So I think we can take from that the idea that no matter how bad things are, and I really echo what you just said, we have to retain, I would say we have to retain optimism of intellect as well. It's not just optimism of the will, it's optimism of the intellect as well, because we know that movements for emancipation and political progress do experience victories. We just have to work like hell to bring them about. We have to be able to seize the conjuncture. We have to be able to recognise and exploit and harness the particular political moment we find ourselves in and know what is and isn't possible. Of course, you can't know. You can't know. So you have to be open to taking risks. And that's the other thing that I would say. I see such a lot of impetus towards radical change and assertive organising being hamstrung by the rationalisations and second thoughts and second guessing that people who are, people like us, I think I can probably say for most people here, people who care about the world, people who are also quite thoughtful about it, people who are alive to the complexities. We have I think, or I certainly do, have a tendency to be aware of everything that could go wrong. And you just got to ignore that. You just got to take the right risks. You've got to not take political advice from your enemies. That's an extremely important thing, I think. There are any number of people, as I've said before, but it's an important point, who will finger wag at you and lecture at you for being too reckless, being irresponsible, playing with fire, just not taking people with you. Don't go out on a limb. Don't go out on a limb because you just alienate everyone. These kinds of advice, in my view, are almost always bullshit. They're almost always bullshit. We did so many things in that 10-year period at the university which we were told were, counterproductive or, not cautious enough, they would lose us friends. And the trend has been exactly the opposite. You shouldn't run away from a fight. You shouldn't run away from a fight. You shouldn't be afraid of that initial period of polarisation that happens. You can't be in activism if you're not prepared to make enemies. You can't try to please everyone. Don't take advice from your political enemies. But ultimately, at the end of the day, institutions can be shifted. They really can be shifted. I think we're seeing it nationally in the NTEU at the moment. I anticipate that we will have a national pro-BDS position in the next couple of years, maybe even sooner. I'm right about that. And again, apologies for what now strikes me looking at this list as a staggering banality of everything that I've just said.
Can I just say, they don't want us to know how numerous we are, but looking at this room, look at how numerous we are. There's no emperors in place.
Thank you to both of you. May is going to
thank you officially and close the meeting in a moment. But I just want to give my personal thanks to both of you. You have been inspiring, you have given us strategic advice, and you have strengthened the fire in our belly to go out and fight for Palestine and for humanity. Before I pass to May, just a very quick word from Tammy from Demilitarise RIT.
Thank you so much to all the speakers and to the two guest speakers in particular. It's been really, really inspiring to hear success stories, which we really need, as you said, we need the history of success stories to be able to make the next success stories. So really grateful for that. Demilitarise RMIT, just super briefly, and there are posters around so you can read more of the detail when you like, and there are flyers outside as well. Is a new and still small, but we want to get larger, staff-led group made up of members of the RMIT university community who are concerned about RMIT's ongoing kind of involvement in the genocide through its weapons industry relationships and a whole range of other relationships. And we have a range of demands that we are calling on RMIT University to respond to. We've sent an open letter to the Vice-Chancellor and management, and we also have a public version of that open letter that is in the form of a link on the QR code, and we welcome anybody in the community, whether you're from RMIT or the broader community, to sign that open letter to kind of add to the voices at universities all over the place making these similar demands. And we welcome student involvement as well. The reason we say we're a staff-led group is that we really want to use our industrial power, and speaking of the stories that we heard today, we want to be able to use union membership and also grow union membership in order to meet these political goals, which are actually one of our demands is, in fact, that academics across all fields should be funded, publicly funded, to do research and not rely on defence partnerships to be able to do that research. That's actually one of our demands. So, the relationship between the industrial struggles that we're in, we're still currently negotiating for a new EDA at RMIT. It's been 3 years since our last one ended. Those industrial struggles are so intricately linked to the broader political issues, and I think that it's kind of our job to make that really, really clear and to not allow them to stay separate when we're having our union struggles. So if you are interested at all, please contact us. The information's on the poster and the leaflets. We'd really love to grow and be a group that the university can't ignore anymore. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie. I'd like to first thank everyone for attending this event today. I know it is a cold Melbourne night, it is in the middle of the week, but I think it is a testament to the level of solidarity that Palestine has here in Melbourne, and the willingness for people to come out and also learn about our struggles and how we've had successes. I know that for a lot of people, 10 months of genocide is horrifying and disheartening, but the solidarity that we find in each other, the communities that we have built, the allies that we have, the voices that we have combined is a success. For long-time campaigners and activists, we were isolated, we were on the fringes, we weren't heard, and we were voiceless. But it has taken decades of work that we have learned from our own families, from our own people, from our own history of struggle and resistance, that we must persist. We must persist. They may tell you that the fight is over, and it never is. Our people in Gaza show us that spirit of resistance and sword. We show it every single day we show up. You may think that you're the only person in the room who stands for Palestine, or speaks for Palestine, but trust me, you have 10 other people standing with you. And it's about finding those allies, finding like-minded people, and standing up together collectively. And that is exactly what the Zionists are afraid of, what state repression forces are afraid of. They want to keep us silent. So if you do want to fight for Palestine and stand for Palestine, get involved. Get involved in the Sunday protests at the very least. Get involved in your workplaces, in your unions, in your council groups. I'm going to say join Free Palestine Melbourne. But get involved, that's what matters. If you'd like to learn about Palestinian resistance, if you want to get involved in campaigns, do join us at Free Palestine Melbourne, because we don't just work alone. We have learned you need to work with allies. You should grow a movement. You need to grow more allies. Those are the lessons that we've learned from our families and from our communities. It's the lessons that we've learned while we've been campaigning for decades in this country. We can't do it alone. And we have allies everywhere. We've got wonderful Nick, we've got Sarah, we've got every single one of you in this room. So before I finish up the night, I'm going to welcome a young student. His name is Ben from Students for Palestine. Little fun fact, I was one of the founders of Students for Palestine. It was at La Trobe University. But our students have been campaigning for Palestine on our universities, and so have our decades, our academics for decades. Police repression of our students is not ahistorical. In particular, as Nick spoke about in 2014, Palestinian students and student activists who support for Palestine were targeted on university campuses. In particular, RMIT Uni tried to expel Palestinian students and allies from their campus for campaigning for Palestine. Happened to be one of them. And we prevailed, and we still continue to campaign. Because Palestine is about standing for your basic humanity. We recognise our intersectional struggles, and we stand side by side with our allies and those in resistance and struggle against oppression. So let's give a warm welcome to Josh. Yeah.
Thank you, May, and FPM and Demilitarised RMIT. I just wanted to do a quick announcement about one of the big campaigns that Students for Palestine RMIT have done this semester, and that we need your help to build towards. So we're building towards a student general meeting. So as somebody over here before spoke about how outrageous it is that actually all these weapons companies on campus, that students and staff don't have any democratic say in it at all. What we want to do is have a mass student general meeting. That's the highest decision-making body for students at the university. Up in Queensland recently, they've successfully pulled one off, got about 1,200 students out one evening to vote almost unanimously in favour of supporting a free Palestine and opposing weapons companies on campus. And that's exactly what we want to do right here at RMIT as well. So currently, we need to collect signatures. So if you're a student here, you can see me afterwards, you can sign the petition. But if you're a staff member, we would love to come into your class and give, a short introduction about why the students in your classroom should get involved in the student general meeting. Currently, it's looking like we'll be able to call this for about week 3, which is really excellent. I think, is a response to the huge support we've got amongst the student base and amongst the staff. The NTU has been backing this from the very start when we set up the encampments. So thank you for letting me give this intro. So if you're a student, please sign the petition, join the WhatsApp group, come to the meeting, and if you're a staff member, I believe Trisha is going to send around a link. If you're in the NTU, please respond, let us know when your classes are, and so we can come and hopefully build to a nice student general meeting, the likes of which RMIT has never seen. And free Palestine.
Thank you, everyone. This is the end of our session. Please feel free to come over and speak to some of us. And thank you for coming out tonight. And we'll hopefully see you at the breakfast on Monday.
Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea.
Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea.
Palestine will be free.